Hello. The topic of today is architecture education. What are the missing skill sets? This topic came about from a Facebook post in a group called Architecture Students Group. I don't know why I'm in that group, but I'm always curious about what are the issues that students of architecture have from any country in the world, at any setting, in any context. Quite a number of people from developing countries, and I see a pattern of confusion. But apart from that, I would like to go into a specific post by someone whom I assume is a young person. I look at the profile and looks like someone who's in his early 20s. And he asks, any tips for how to improve my skills without copying into others? Perspective/plate. Okay. I only understand about how to improve the person's skills. There are a lot of comments, and my comment was, I'm always thinking about students nowadays and what skill sets they are missing out on. The ability to observe and sketching rather than taking photographs is essential because you need to acquire discernment. So we know that discernment means the ability to judge very well. But I didn't put it there. I just said that, discernment. And further, I said reading a lot on many subjects and not just architecture makes you learn about concepts. And I don't mean architecture concepts only. This will lead you to be able to be more critical and more analytical. I know, number one, that you need some observation skills. So therefore, sketching. And I know that number two, that you need to have analytical skills and be more critical. And that's about reading. And discernment is one of the keywords that is necessary to be prepared to be in the architecture world. I'm talking about the traditional architect. And I'm also talking about maybe more than that. Someone who's able to be critical and more entrepreneurial, which is necessary in this day and age. Because the ability to actually discuss all these things is one of the things to get ahead in the industry. Because the industry is going to be sophisticated because of digitalization and computerization. But if you don't have the basic skills to be an architect, then you'll be lost. Because you wouldn't love architecture. You wouldn't be able to communicate or be that discerning individual in architecture that you need to be. Is it that during my time when I was studying architecture in the 1980s, we all had to learn how to be discerning? For those who didn't really want to be discerning or want to be taking the Part 2 architecture course, which will actually require you to have some sort of discernment, they will opt out and they will do something else. It was a very clear-cut thing with regard to how your career would progress in keeping in mind to be the architect. But nowadays, because of, like I said, computerization and digitalization, like this guy said, the one who commented, without copying into others, he was thinking about digitalization. He was still thinking about computer softwares and architecture softwares that are to do with architecture. Not architecture, the computer, of course. Architecture. This is what we're trying to say. I think I am speculating this is what he's trying to say. It is not outside of the screen or the laptop or the PC. It is not looking outside. It is still looking inside the PC. The skills that he's trying to find. And that's why I said what I said, because as I recalled, as an architectural educator, it is so important to be analytical. And here I'm going to part 2 of this discussion with anyone out there who is an educator as well, anyone out there who is an architectural student, and especially if you're in a Masters of Architecture course. If you haven't actually picked up this skill when you're doing Masters of Architecture, you'll be lost. I'm saying this from a point of view that you want to be able to choose your career path. You will not want to be only to choose one path, because there is a limitation to your skill sets. By the time you're doing Masters of Architecture, if you're still copying into others' perspectives and whatnots, you'll be a very good illustrator. How you got through Masters of Architecture was because, shall I say, your tutors were not very discerning to judge the students' work. I've had done a podcast on the 3 types of architecture graduates, so 3 types of students that's emerging from the Masters of Architecture course especially. One is the entrepreneurial student, someone who is very good at design and be able to look at systems rather than just design problem. The first set of students, and usually they're the cream of the crop. Then you have the traditional architect, which is solid, dependable students who can be competent with the drawing skills that they have, competent enough to actually go into that mainstream traditional architecture path that they set out to be. But the first set of students I mentioned just now, the more entrepreneurial ones, they will have more options. They could even start out on their own after a few years. Now, this is different than what Kevin Martlow was speculating, that by the age of 40, you will have your own, you'll be confident enough to start on your own. But nowadays, you see a lot of people be able to start on their own because it's like you learn things quicker if you know how to do it. And there are so many subsets. There are so many other streams and other ways to actually develop architecture. And that includes specialization. Hence, you could, by the age of 35, or even in the early 30s, start out on your own. And of course, there are those who are the late bloomers. I'm a late bloomer, so I know what that's like. Who decided to do project management or academia, or yes, I'm saying that people who are doing academia could be from this group or could be from the other 2 groups, but a lot came from this group where they think that teaching is an option. And the third group, which is still figuring out about architecture, is a healthy thing. Why I put it in the third group is because often they're not thinking about they're not thinking about architecture in the same way as their tutors are. And they're thinking about, struggling about a few things. They could be struggling with their life at that time as well. But they will figure it out. And it could be a very competent architect later. So, now in the light of this topic, which is to do with what skill sets necessary and what skill sets are missing nowadays with students of architecture. And I specifically focus on analytical thinking and critical thinking and reading a lot. Often we talk about concept and ideas, and then we know that someone will have a different concept of the same building type, just say a hospital or a hotel, and there are different concepts of a hotel or office building or institutional building or housing. So we're always stuck in architecture and we're not reading more. We're not looking at ideas and philosophies from different perspectives. Architects as well, if they're going to talk about architecture, they have to think about out of the box and the bigger picture. And that is the critical part. The critical part comes from reading around the subject in a very broad way and yet zooming in onto a very deep diving or zooming into a very context specific issue. Context specific means, like, for example, Kampong Kerinci, which is an area with a lot of people of the lower middle class will need to work 2 jobs in a day, who work sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, selling at a market or driving a Grab or doing the full-time job of working in a company. I mean, a specific, meaning financially, meaning place, meaning environment, the issues surrounding the low-cost flats of Kampong Kerinci and the facilities that are lacking there, the library that is not opened to the public, and there are students learning at the restaurant, the cheap restaurants, because they cannot find space in the library to study. I mean, specific, meaning that the issues and the problems are very, very specific to that environment. And yet you talk about broadly, you talk about the philosophy of education, or you talk about the philosophy of education in the country as compared to the philosophy of education in the Steiner School or Montessori, when you talk about primary school education, and how in that context one could be closer to those other philosophies. Now, of course, those require reading, and that can result in a more critical mind. And a critical mind is necessary to be more analytical, to break down the components and parts, to be able to discern that designing an architecture, designing a building is actually designing architecture, which is actually to do with the world in itself, the world that you're going to create. And there is a philosophy about that. And how you become observant as a student of architecture is that you do not just take photographs, do not just copy paste and create a set of slides that you didn't even observe very well. So when you go to a site-specific or context specificity, issue-driven project, you go and visit the place and look at the context, meaning the people the background of the people, the demographics, not in a very generalistic way of statistics, but in a very qualitative, observant way. Using sketches and sketching it out. Because sketching requires you to, if you take 10 seconds of taking a photograph, sketching requires you to sit there for 5 minutes and sketch it out quickly. The time between 10 seconds and 5 minutes is a long time for you to learn, actually, and absorb a lot of details. So the thing is, we are arguing that students of architecture now, without that skill set of observing well, using sketches, sketching it out, diagrams, it could be a proper sketch. It could be diagrams. It could be observation reflections. It could be notes, visual notes. It could be a proper perspective. It could be a detail of a seat or a railing or a space. Some sort of reflection is needed. That reflection is so necessary in order for the person to put two and two together. Because they may recollect at the secondary school. I was in secondary school, they may recollect, and I don't really have this problem. But these people here, in this context, they do have a problem. Something like that. You make connections in your mind with this observation and the missing skill sets that students have nowadays. Because the demand by the lecturer is that PowerPoint presentations, I'm sorry to the educators out there who was trained as an architect and who just practicing whatever other people are doing and following what other people are doing as well. When you have PowerPoint presentation, there is no connection with the drawings or the PowerPoint slides with you or with the student. You can't actually grasp it. You can't actually tear the paper that is pinned up. You can't really sketch on the paper. You can't actually, you yourself as an educator cannot be discerning as well in your reviews. And the students won't learn because they are learning from you, how you actually observe yourself, their work. So this sort of interaction is not there and missing, and it's not built upon. People don't grow. The educators don't grow. The students don't grow. So why are we missing out on this? What's wrong with having a much more hands-on, papery, tactile processes? The mind and the eyes and the hands. Okay. So, read and sketch. That's what is necessary. Okay. Going back to the topic of the missing skill sets in architecture education and trying to comment on what this person had posted. So I'm happy that this person posted this because it made us think, and I needed to take my comment and put it in my Facebook post myself. And as a result, this is almost a 20 minutes worth of explanation on this particular missing skill sets. And it's necessary, this skill set, to be replicated or repeated throughout all the years and be part of the tools that architects have or architecture students have. Why must it be that it's everything to do with the laptop? This is so, shall we say, not to do with an architect. Architect has to do with sense and sensibilities. And the word sense means that all the five senses. It's not only vision with a laptop or a PC. It's hearing, smell, taste, tactile, drawing over and over, sketching. It's not staring through the screen and figuring it out, words through the screen. It's a iterative process, architecture, design, and the skills to build up on. Yes, we need to have these conversations, these hard conversations with the colleagues and with the head of departments in architectural schools. And because the way things are, you'd think that it doesn't really matter because they'll just be absorbed in the industry. But this is clear skill sets that would help people along the way to be much more critical, analytical, and they're not lost. And going back to the three types of graduates and students, as I recall, the entrepreneurial one, the traditional architect, and the one that is still figuring out themselves. To be able to have that three choices, even those three choices are different streams. If one does not have the skill sets in the beginning or develop them, one only becoming an illustrator and only can fit into a few skills in a certain company, and one get frustrated because one cannot be discerning and one can't go out on their own or absorb into a developer company. Yes. If one can get out of the developer company and strike out on one's own, that's good. Right? Why did they have to go to the developer company? Because they need to earn more money, obviously, because something in life, they need to get married or get settled down and stuff like that. Sorry about that. That is an indication for me to go. And I will continue with the discussion in part 2. Cheers.